Women, especially moms, we pride ourselves in being flexible, right? Stopping everything to pick a sick child up from school maybe, or pulling off that last-minute project that gets thrown at you the night before. But one expert says you might not be as go with the flow as you think you are. So today, a self-check to see where you stand, plus strategies on how to be more flexible. Erin Shepard is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in helping women, specifically moms. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much.
So as I was reading through your notes, an interesting aha jumped out to me. I mean, we do, as women and wives and mothers, think of ourselves and pride ourselves in being flexible in action. You say we're not always flexible in our thoughts.
We aren't. So a lot of times when I see women, they're coming in for treatment of their mood disorders, or they've just got some external stress in life that's just causing them a hard time. A lot of times they'll just say things like, I'm just so overwhelmed and I'm not handling things the way I want to. And I notice that in common, they have really rigid thinking around their problem. And flexibility is the perfect way to kind of free ourselves from that all or nothing thinking.
So we're fooling ourselves just a little bit in thinking we're flexible.
Just a little bit, yeah.
So you define this as all or nothing mentality, an all or nothing mentality approach. Define that for us.
So all or nothing thinking happens anytime we have a thought and we send it through a black and white filter. So we send the thought in and then it comes out all or nothing, black or white. There's no gray, there's no in between.
And in some sense, Erin, isn't this required in motherhood? Aren't you required to kind of make decisions on the ground and call it one way or the other? Isn't that your job?
Absolutely. But what happens is we kind of get ourselves stuck. I always tell my clients to look for thoughts that begin with I have to. And if that doesn't follow up immediately with like a basic need, chances are that's the beginning of an all or nothing thought.
So you've got some examples, some phrases that really, if we're saying these things, if we're thinking these things, it might lead to an all or nothing mentality. I'm flexible enough. I have to. Once this is over, then I will be able to. What's wrong with those thought patterns?
So what happens is we set ourselves up with an imaginary measuring stick. So we have something that's important to us. Might be keeping our house clean, might be exercising. So we say, I have to make sure everything's picked up before I go to bed at night. Or I have to exercise every day. And then what happens is anytime we fall short for whatever reason, then it's not good enough. And so we create an invisible finish line. Kind of a common one right now might be, I'm going to get all of my Christmas shopping done before December so then I can just enjoy December and enjoy Christmas. But what happens is we never really get to that finish line because there's always going to be something else. And so flexibility is kind of the perfect thing to work in to kind of help it so that we're not so exhausted all the time.
So to connect the dots, by not reaching the finish line, that's where the anxiety and the feeling of unrest or internal unsettlement is coming from?
Exactly.
How do we then make the shift? How do we get unstuck, so to speak?
So just like if we were going to increase our flexibility, we want to do different exercises. So we can think about being flexible with our time. I had a client that family dinner was really important to her. She really liked that family time. So that was kind of that was the value she was sticking on her measuring stick. And anytime it was chaotic or anytime it fell short of that, then she was failing in her mind. And so one thing that she did is she switched to breakfast as their meal together. And it's important to point out that that wasn't a seamlessly transition. You know, there's not just magically 2 extra hours in their morning. She had to wake up earlier. She had to rely on the older kids to clean up breakfast. But then that way she could still have that time together with her family. And she was being flexible enough now that she could enjoy that and still feeling like she was doing everything that she wanted to.
So the flexibility comes and she tacks the extra work and time at the beginning of the day as opposed to the stress at the end of the day when it just wasn't working. Do moms overlook options or maybe resources that could help us be a little more flexible?
Yeah, I think we do that all the time. So I worked with a client that was just struggling internally with a lot of trauma she had experienced as a child. So it wasn't anything anybody could see on the outside, and it wasn't anything that she felt comfortable enough to ask people for help. But internally, she was waging a war. And so with her resources, she was really careful to be flexible with them by creating a weekly to-do list instead of a daily one. So then that way, if that particular day she just wasn't feeling like she had it in her, she would just kind of get through the basic things that she needed to function because she was dealing with something that was so inside her. But then over the course of the week, on days that she felt better, she could tackle some of those extra things. So she was just being flexible with her resources in what she could accomplish each day.
That's obviously a more sensitive and somewhat dramatic example, but I think on the daily, what's interesting about this entire concept is we're imposing this rigidness on ourselves, right? How can we cut loose of that and be more flexible just on our own time, on our own person?
And I think that kind of happens with just how we treat ourselves. You know, we talk a lot about self-compassion and treating ourselves the same way we would a friend. You know, if a friend comes to you and is having a hard time, you would say things like, it's okay, you're doing the best you can. But then when it's ourselves, we're not using that same language. And we probably could benefit a lot from saying to ourselves, you know, you're trying, you're doing good enough.
Sure.
And being flexible with our own thoughts to kind of create ways that we can then be flexible with our resources and time.
And I have to imagine that extends beyond just ourselves, but allowing that flexibility to benefit other people as well.
Absolutely. So a lot of times when we're stuck in this rigid thinking, unfortunately, our kids, our spouses, our close friends, they're not. And so then we're getting so uptight when things don't go exactly the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, you're not dancing at my pace. You're not doing my dance.
Exactly. And so sometimes we just kind of have to step back and say, I know I'm struggling with this. I know I tend to do this, but I need to be flexible and realize that everybody else is just doing the best they can too.
Great points, great advice. Thank you so much. In fact, you've built a practice with this whole flexibility idea in mind.
I have. So I am specializing in maternal mental health, and so everything I do is online through a secure video conferencing system late on weeknights. And so it kind of gives moms access to therapy that can't necessarily make it to offices or have that flexibility in their day.
You can go to bed and then mom can address her needs. Where can we find more about you?
At yarrowtherapy.com.
All right, Erin, pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.